pre-show material. People need to hear the wisdom of Gary Brecka.
I know, right?
So,
Let me pull up the podcast so I can give it specifics.
so for those that are just joining, we're having a conversation about Gary Brecka and creatine and all that good stuff. So we
I'm
wanted
trying to
to we
find the
wanted to
one.
share that.
I'm trying to find the one that hopefully it'll show all. And let's see here. Doug Collins, Brigham Bueller, no, Pampa.
Brigham Bueller. That's a great name. Brigham Bueller.
Yeah.
Let me do the
Here's
share
one
here.
on July 3rd, one that neither of us really are of any relevance to us, but Danica Patrick shares her health transformation after removing breast implants. No, no
No, that's
relationship.
no, 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 no,
Okay.
not even gonna.
Max, I
No.
know. Max Lugavere. Max Lugavere. It's
Okay.
was from June 26th. So it's on the Gary Brecka. What is his podcast called? The Ultimate
The
Human
ultimate
Podcast?
human, the ultimate human, I think is his. I
Uh-huh.
think.
Yeah. So anyway, it's Gary Brecka's podcast. On June 26th, he hosted Max Lugavere, who
Okay.
is a who is a lead researcher. I think his mother, 10 years ago, I think he said in the podcast, 10 years ago was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and so he's a lead researcher, kind of expert on Alzheimer trials and tests. And anyway, the title is First Alzheimer Creatine Trial Shows Shocking Results.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting because he says, let's see if I can pull up. I'm going to pull it up here. It said the first clinical trial testing creatine for Alzheimer's just dropped, and the results are absolutely mind blowing. In this episode, I sat down with Max Lugavere at the White House to discuss
Okay.
the new research on creatine. The pilot study gave 20 Alzheimer's patients 20 grams. That's huge.
20
Of
grams,
creatine
huge.
daily for 8 weeks. So 20 grams a day for 2 months. The results statistically significant improvements across nearly every cognitive measurement. And so what was
Holy
cool was,
cow.
what was really cool was in the podcast, this Max Lugavere was saying that a lot of the treatments for Alzheimer's focus on the like sort of treating the condition, which
Yeah.
so the condition being not memory loss, but the neurological, the physiological part of the brain anatomy that is
Yeah.
affected by Alzheimer's, or actually that causes the disease, that causes the dementia, that causes the cognitive decline. And he was talking about how the those efforts focus primarily on that. It's mainly prescription. It's mainly uh, done in a treatment
Yeah.
of the end result, treating the end result. But he said this is the interesting thing about this on the creatine was he said was not that necessarily that it demonstrates the potential for creatine being a part of a reversal protocol, which I mean, that would be pretty amazing if they did come up with something that helps start reversing the effects because we know the heart can, right?
Right.
We know that people who have plaquing and different things in the heart that there's a protocol that can actually help remove the plaquing of the heart. Um, but anyway, it said that he said that what it does demonstrate is that it is a high level of demonstrating the possibility of um, avoiding,
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
treatment plan to preventative. So it was pretty interesting.
It seems like, Bredninson kind of got the ball rolling
Yeah.
with like, we've not made any major advancements in Alzheimer's in 50 years and whatever. Um, and now it seems like there's some real progress being made. I was reading some articles about uh APOB,
Hmm.
like everything is so focused on LDL cholesterol with heart disease and all that kind of stuff. But I was reading an article the other day that said basically LDL is like a fire can being at the scene of the fire,
Yes.
and people see it and they automatically assume, well, that must be
Yep.
why the fire started, when in reality it's the plaque particles in the blood that build up over time and cause that, which is more of an indicator. And now they're saying that's the same thing that happens with like Alzheimer's. It's the plaque buildup
Yep.
over time that starts happening. So, and then there's obviously some things you can do about that. So the health
That's
journey's
interesting.
fun, bro.
It's incredible. Well, it's funny because Stephanie was telling me the other day that she was talking to somebody who's taking a popular weight loss treatment.
Hmm.
Nobody that this was a random person, so nobody that we know, nobody. So I'm not indicting
You're
anybody
outing
at
you're
all.
outing
No,
somebody right now.
no, it's just somebody
Your
somebody that
phone
she
will
was
start going off in 2 minutes.
yeah, yeah, somebody she was randomly talking to. And it was funny because she said the person was talking about their weight loss and talking about that they were diabetic and that they had, they weren't anymore and so on and so forth. But then the person was standing or, talking, standing, whatever they were doing, whatever position that they were having their conversation in, um, that the person had a sugary soda in their hand. And she's like, what? Like, but I told her, I said, but you know what though, babe? I said, here's the funny thing. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so I
100%.
told her, I said, I was doing some research. This was my response to her. I said, I was doing some research the other day on, um, they were talking about like NAD plus.
Yeah.
So, NAD plus is so necessary for like repair of like DNA repair and mitochondrial support and so on and so forth. Just so many things. And so, but I was reading a deal that said, so I think I might have sent you all the research that I did on the um, methylene, the
Hmm.
the the
NC.
reductor, yeah, it's so methylene tetrahydrofolate,
Right.
methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase.
MTHF.
Yeah. So the reductase is an enzyme, but it's a genetic mutation, and it's a homozygous one, which means you get it from both parents. So I was studying. I'm like, well, why sometimes do you see C667T? Sometimes you see C667T with it, and I found, like, I'm studying, like I'm going down the rabbit hole, bro. And I found that
Shocking.
that's the location on the DNA strand. That's where you find it. Like, that is, so C667T is like going to a library and pulling out the index card, and you say it's in whatever section of the library and you can go find it. This is the section on the DNA strand where the mutation exists. So the mutation has to be homozygous, which means it's both parents contributed to it. So so here's what's interesting. I did all that study. Then I was listening to this woman talking about that if you have that mutation and you take NAD, that it might make you not feel well if you have a methylation mutation. And then I said, why? So then I started studying out why. You know what I found? I told her, I said, here's what's crazy. They said 2 out of 3 people with inflammatory issues, psoriasis, those kind of things, leaky gut, those types of things, 2 out of 3 are MTHFR mutation positive.
Interesting.
And so And so it goes back. It's a methylation issue. So here's the deal. So I said, okay, but watch this. Okay. I said, remember, babe, you said AG1 was a game changer for you.
Yeah.
And here's what's so funny. She was searching the other day, what are some methylated daily vitamins I can take? Number one on the list, AG1.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
so and so she's taking vitamins. So if people go, well, you're taking, you've taken vitamins all along. Don't tell me AG1 all of a sudden out of nowhere. You've been taking vitamins. But
If you, yeah,
if it's methylation, if it's methylated and you've been taking your vitamins and your body hasn't been absorbing them, or it hasn't, or it's been, whatever, it hasn't been assimilating them properly, and now all of a sudden you're taking a methylated vitamin, yeah, it will be a game changer. But I was using that right there as an explanation
100%.
of why sometimes people don't understand.
Well, it's like I'm
You're like,
taking,
why don't you get it?
yeah, I take a B12 with methylfolate because my test came back and it didn't say for sure. There's another test you can take, but everything is indicating that I probably have that genetic defect. So I can't transfer the folate and the folic acid with which then, man, and you hear the stories about that. It just dumps the folic acid basically into your gut,
Yep,
which then produces a lot of your
that's right.
autoimmune stuff, a lot of your Crohn's disease, all that kind
That's
of
what
stuff
that's what I'm talking about, Chris.
is
That's what I'm saying.
actually,
2 out of 3 people with autoimmune
yeah,
inflammatory issues,
yeah,
etc.
yeah. It's
Leaky
all
gut.
it's
That's
all
why they say
related,
it causes
but you don't
leak.
know that.
People are like, well, now wait a minute. How can the methylene reductase mutation create leaky gut? Well, your body's not processing folic acid, dumping it into your stomach, and it's acid.
Which is the most prevalent element in our food is folic acid. It's in
Right,
everything.
because we've stripped
It's in
our food
everything.
from all genetic, or from all its genetic nutrition, and then try to anything that you try to re-add into food, what was for some reason taken out, that's what we were talking about when you talk about processed foods, even whole
Yeah.
foods.
Well, even like not knowing, counting calories. You start eating. Went to Texas Roadhouse and kind of had a little cheat day on Sunday, and I ate 2 Texas Roadhouse rolls. And I looked at the calories. I'm like, it's no wonder. It's no wonder we're in the condition we're in
Yeah,
with obesity and all the kinds of things. Man, so many just empty calories that people are
yeah.
eating,
And then you
So
go, that's not worth it. Like you walk
right,
away going, that wasn't worth that.
right,
I
right.
know. You know,
I've
you know
had a
what's
cheat day
interesting?
with fries, and I'm like, the calories and the fried stuff, whatever, like it's not worth it. Every once in a while I'll do a cheat, but it's just not worth, what it does to your
Yeah.
health and all the things. So
So just a simplification too, by the way, for people, this was something that I wasn't aware of, um, because I've heard the term folate, folic acid, and B9, and they're all related. But like, what's the relationship? Well, folate is the compound
mhm,
found in foods that carry the B9, that have
right,
B9 folate. But it goes into our system as methylene. The methylene, it
right,
goes in our system as methylene tetrahydrofolate. But the enzyme breaks it down to methyl tetrahydrofolate, or 5 MTHF.
right, right.
So 5 MTHF is the folic acid that we can use, that carries the B9 vitamins that the body utilizes. So anyway, just, I don't know, chemistry, just a little chemistry lesson there.
I love it. I always I aced chemistry, but I never understood any of it. I
I,
aced it, got straight A's,
Same,
never made any sense to me.
same. All I did was just regurgitated the information.
Just
I'm learning it
100%.
now. I'm learning it now. Like I'm learning, because I'm like, okay, but here's the difference though. In high school, if that was the answer, and somebody goes, why? Well, Which, by the way, I was asking what is the similarity between that enzyme deficiency and like my lactose intolerance? Because the body isn't
Mm,
producing a lactase enzyme. And it said, well, the difference is that it happens at the methylation stage rather than the digestive stage. But you're right in the similarity. Then I said, watch this. I said, my I said my brother and I, our maternal grandmother had a form of dementia that was related to pernicious anemia. And it said, you're right into assuming because pernicious anemia is the inability to absorb B12, which is a close B vitamin to B9, that pernicious anemia causes dementia by years of B12 deficiency in the brain.
mm,
But it said, but if a person has the reductase mutation along with pernicious anemia, it jumps it to like a 90% potential for dementia.
interesting. Whoa, that's crazy.
So I'm studying this deal because the thing about it is all this is about the enzyme produces what's called CH3. It's carbon, carbon with 3 hydrogen,
Hydrogen's right.
and that goes in and turns on and off for the mitochondria. It serves the role of being an on-off switch in the mitochondria. So when the mitochondria says, I need this, I need that, the CH3 says on, off, on, off. So that's why the chemistry didn't matter to me in high school or you. It's just like, well, I'm just want to get the grade. But now I'm like, no. I want to know what's this producing and why, and how's it relate to mitochondria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Well, you were spitting a bunch of facts out. And I was like, this needs part of our pre-show so people can. This is why you show up early. You get a chemistry education. You get Dr. Hyman, Gary Brecka level conversation. So it's good stuff. Good stuff. All right, I think we're ready to rock and roll. Give us a chief meteorologist, Ken Bastarkey, weather report on the fours. No, it's on the zeros. Sorry, that's off 1040. It's on the zeros.
It's already 1040. Oh my
1040,
God.
bro. It's 1040, and I do need to be done by 11:35. So
Me too. Chief meteorologist Kim Bastarkey checking in today. Currently 69 degrees with a high of 81. It's sunny in Northeast Ohio. This is why you live in Cleveland.
that was a little added bonus.
Yeah,
Is
no
that
other
the only
reasons.
reason to live in
No, no
Cleveland?
other reason. No other reason.
I knew. I could feel the shade was coming, man. I feel the shade was coming. Oh man.
Oh, all the Cleveland people are being like,
It's, the dog pound is going crazy right
I
now.
know.
All right, you ready to rock and roll?
I am.
Let's do it. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham alongside my big brother, Gary Brecka Jr. the third.
You got me, bro. You got me with that one, dude.
You,
You
yeah,
snuck up on me like a ninja on that one.
I did. I snuck it in there. You had to be on the pre-show to fully appreciate that. And no, it's actually my brother is here, Ken Dillingham Jr. the third. So we had a great chemistry lesson, health, functional health. Like you were dropping bombs, bro, pre-show.
Dude, it's, you know what? The thing about it is this, it's just that, it's that process of being able to wrap my mind around. There's so much information out there. I told Stephanie the other day, I said, you know what? I'm not going to jump around. I'm not just going to jump around from, I love
Same.
Dr. Mark Hyman. I love Gary Brecka. I love Andrew Huberman. I listen to all these guys, and they all kind of come from different angles based on their, I don't know, background
Yeah.
and emphasis and so on. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So I started doing some research and trying to coordinate and correlate what angles they come from so that I could at least situate the way I want to think about it. And then, okay, all right, now from there, what do I need to learn? And so I've been on this research deal with you and this process because you and I share so much genetic. I mean, people just have to watch our podcast and understand how much genetic similarity there is. And so, we're sort of iron sharpening iron in all this.
100%, 100% on the journey for sure. And I do think it would be good. I think we need to have a podcast and just kind of talk about some of the things, even like just our experiences, to share the stories of kind of why we started this whole journey and what we're doing to get healthy, because it affects so much, man. I mean, let's be real. There's it's not a common topic within
Yep.
Christian ranks, and not that we worship our bodies or whatever. We understand,
No,
whatever, but we want to be as
we honor it
effective
as the
for as long
temple of
as
the
we
Holy
can.
Ghost, though.
Simple, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. Brother Bernard actually had a post about that, about you know appreciating the temple and doing things that care for that, and whatever. We also need, Ken. I don't know if you know this. We didn't talk about this. Sneak up on you on something else. Do you know what next Tuesday is?
Not a clue.
Next Tuesday is exactly, to the very day, the 5-year anniversary of the Mobilized Church Podcast.
Stop it.
Yeah, started
What?
on July 29th. We dropped our first episode July 29th of 2020.
My
What?
word. See,
What?
that's why Chris Dillingham is the beast of just everything that has to do with organizational quality. It's
Well,
unbelievable.
I knew it was coming up. I thought maybe we had missed it. I actually thought it was this week. And so I went back and looked, and it was the 29th. So we need to, between now and then, we need to put our brains together and figure out what we're
That's
going to
it.
do for a big time
Oh,
celebration. Maybe
it's
you
a
guys
high
got
holy
some
day.
suggestions, people that are listening. Maybe you got some suggestions on things we can do to celebrate 5 years. And you just I'll just say right now, like, man, bro, the responses that we're getting, the weekly viewership, and it may not always show if you're on different platforms. It may look like, well, there's not as many people watching, whatever. But just know we're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, X, and so it's kind of spread
Yeah.
across multiple
And
platforms.
that's just a live recording.
That's just the live recording. The live recording numbers, the download numbers are just bananas, and so we really appreciate everybody checking in. We're trying to keep it fresh and
Yeah.
lively, and I
Podcast.
honestly feel like, well, I
Yeah,
was
go
just gonna
ahead.
say, I honestly feel like I feel like we're just kind of now really hitting our stride with
I
it.
agree. I agree. Yeah, and podcasts are traditionally things that are, that you that are there for you when you want to go get them. I mean, like
Yeah,
people showing up for our podcast recording. In fact, I want to give a shout out to Charles Markham, who's here at the house
yeah,
today.
yeah,
Creative Colors, man, he is literally the best painter I've ever seen in my life. Like
yeah,
it's unbelievable. I taped my house one time to thought I was going to help him, and he's like trying to figure out how to tell me like that's actually going to hurt me. He
yeah,
he goes and
yeah. Real
takes the
painters don't
entire
tape,
tape
right?
off. No, he took all
Yeah,
the
real
tape
painters don't
off,
tape.
and he's like, yeah, I can make a straighter line by hand than I can using your tape. But anyway, he's here today. He sent me a text and said, hey, 9 minutes till podcast. He's
That's
here. He's
awesome,
out
man.
working on the house and sent me a text.
That is awesome,
So,
man. That's
and
awesome.
and
Well,
look, we hit two things today that we're passionate about: health and sports. And I offended Cleveland, but here's the deal, though. I'm not offending Cleveland. Let me just say it like this. I was talking about Cleveland, right, in the pre-show, and I was talking about this is the reason why you live in Cleveland. But my example is simply this: look at Cleveland. You had Baker Mayfield. No, I understand. Baker Mayfield, there could be some issues, but look at him in Tampa. Hello. Look,
he's doing all right.
but right, but you got Baker Mayfield and you just buried the guy. You didn't turn him into the potential. And then so, oh, let's get Deshaun Watson. Oh yeah,
How,
that's a
how'd that work
that's a
out for you?
brilliant dumpster fire to start. And then right, and it wasn't like it wasn't already in the works when they got him. And then, okay, but then let's continue the drama by getting Kenny Pickett and Shadon Sanders.
Sadur.
Shadur, yeah,
Sadur.
yeah. Like, I mean, and who else? Didn't it get a third?
Yeah, there's somebody else.
Who they
Uh,
picked before Shadur Sanders.
yeah. Oh man, who is it? Another mobile quarterback, I think. Somebody might know, be able to tell us another mobile quarterback.
It's like,
Well, I could
yeah,
even bring up, I mean, like you're just talking football, I mean, they thought they had their moment of glory when Rajay Davis hit that home run in
yeah,
the bottom of the ninth of the World Series, or was it the eighth, whatever it was. But I don't know if you know this or not, Ken, but the Chicago Cubs won the World Series over the Cleveland
that year,
Indians in 2016. So just
that
want to
year.
put that out there, rub it
The
in,
rain, the
Cleveland
rain
fans.
delay proved that the GOAT curse had been removed.
The Lord was on our side that day. There's no doubt about it. The Lord was
Yeah,
blessing us and helping us,
yeah.
though, for sure. All
The
right, so
title of
let's
our
get rolling.
podcast is Don't Look Now. Cleveland Browns have a quarterback issue.
For real. Today I feel like this episode is like, I can't remember what the title was, but there was a category in Jeopardy. It wasn't like potent potables or something like that, but it was like some random
Yeah,
topic thing you never knew what it was going to be about. That's what I feel like
yeah.
the podcast, but it's not. We got a
We
real
have a real
topic to
topic
talk
today.
about today, and it's
Yeah,
going to be a good one. So
it is.
today I want you to start, because
Okay.
this is something you've really been wrestling through and putting together some information, and I think it's something, obviously, is deeply in you, but I think this is such an important topic for the age and the hour that we're living in. So why don't you get us started on what our topic is today?
Sure. Well, I was so I've been doing in the first half of 2025, I've been doing a deep dive study in the book of Acts. In fact, I just finished. So I spent a little over 6 months, and basically it was, I mean, if you break it down, there's 28 chapters. So, you know, basically a chapter a month, right? 26 weeks, uh, uh, or I mean, I'm sorry, a chapter a week, and 26 weeks in half a year. So I've been about a chapter a week, and so that means that every single week I'd spend, I'd go a few verses, like I'd read the whole thing, then I'd read a few verses, then write some notes, and so on. So anyway, I got down recently to Acts 28, and which is the last chapter in the book of Acts. And it is basically Paul, right? He has been now transported to Rome. He is set up in his sort of rented apartment, prison. He was like 2 years. People could come and go, but he had a guard. And so he was jailed, but it was like, what do they call that? When a person
House
is
arrest.
house arrest, right? Right. He was under house arrest. And so it was interesting to me as I was reading through this, how that the apostle Paul brings in these Jews and said, "Hey, I don't know if you've heard, but I'm Paul, and the reason why I'm here today." And they said, "We've not received papers." Right? The Jewish leader said, "We've not received papers." So he's in Rome, right? He's in Rome. He calls the Jewish leaders. He said, "Have you heard about me?" And they said, "We've not received papers from Judea, nor have those who've come from there spoken anything about this." And he says, "Well, here's the issue." He said, "I've been charged and am guilty of having the hope of Israel, which is the resurrection of the dead. And Jesus Christ is the first fruits of that. And he appeared to me." So he goes through this whole deal, and they're disputing back and forth and whatever. But what was interesting was they said this, they give this line in Acts 28:22. And they said, "We want to hear more about this, because," this is the wording, "concerning this sect, we know that it is spoken against everywhere."
Mm,
So it hit me how much in the United States of America Christianity has historically held the most favored status religion, even though there's no governmentally or state established religion. it
Right.
has held most favored status in our cultural imagination. So, we know in the United States that Christianity has shaped our institutions, it's inspired our laws, it has occupied a place of public trust. In fact, it's been said before that you could not hope to have been elected president in the United States. This was what was interesting by with Mitt Romney being a presidential candidate,
Sure.
uh, being a Mormon, right? So anyway, so it's interesting to me as I look at Acts 28. I guess the thing that jumped out was when they said that this sect, this Christian thing, is spoken against everywhere. Like
Yeah.
that's a pretty wide scope statement. And it's interesting because the Bible talks about, man, they turned the world upside down, that there's a time within 100 years of this moment in Acts 28, the scales will have tipped toward Christianity in the Roman Empire. And it's interesting because the question that I had was, okay, the question was, how do you grow a church in a world, particularly
Yeah.
with our brain? We think like, oh, we invited state senators and governors. The governor was at our camp meeting, or we had this elected, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have this mindset that says, man, if we can have most favored status, and if we
Hmm.
could have favor in our community, we're going to reach, this is going to be the open door to reach the world. And I look at that in contrast to Acts 28. And I just thought, what would it be if we thought today, how would we grow a church in 2025 if that was our condition, not most favored status?
Yeah. And the reality is, in a lot of ways, that's actually more, not that we should strive to be, like we should attempt to create animosity or anything like that.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, that acceptance actually has a detrimental effect on the church,
Well, that's a
because
great
it
point.
because then it starts blurring the lines, right? Because then which is what happens, you know, after that moment with Paul, and for the next few hundred years, what begins to happen is, it's, as you said, it starts to, the scales tip, now it becomes more accepted in Rome. Then what happens? It gets intermingled, it gets
That's it.
intertwined with their culture,
Yep.
their religious practices, all that kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden, where you had like clear delineation of these are the Jesus followers, and this is everybody else, and like you said, spoke against them everywhere. Now you have this kind of common acceptance, and it actually produced and generated more confusion.
Mm,
um a lot of the things that we have with denominationalism, and the confusion about doctrinal things and the Trinity, and like all that kind of stuff, was
yeah.
was the byproduct of actually being accepted by the things you're talking about, versus facing the persecution, which demanded a firm commitment. You couldn't just be, in those early days, you couldn't just be a casual Christian. You couldn't be a cultural Christian. There were you couldn't be a consumer Christian, because it would cost you everything if you're gonna acknowledge your faith. And so
Mm,
I think in a lot of ways it demanded more commitment.
mm-hmm.
It demanded people to be, you're either in or you're out. There's really not really an in between, which again produced kind of, I think, the mentality of, they had all things in common. They were willing to die. That, like all of that kind of stuff, versus where now we can live in a very comfortable state because everything's well accepted.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Christian, whatever, that's fine. Just believe what you believe, and there's no persecution, there's no suffering. So you can live as a consumer. You can live as kind of just a casual,
Wow.
uh, occasional believer in Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, what was it called? Excuse me. What was it called? The Edict of Milan, right? Which
Hmm.
was the formal, I think it was the formal edict where Christianity became, I mean, eventually it became institutionally
Yeah.
I don't know, intermingled or entwined with state power.
Yeah. Right.
And
That's exactly right.
so it went from, right, like, so what you're saying is it went from like just being a marginal sect that we're reading here in Acts 28:22 to an imperial institution, right? And
Absolutely.
so what happened? I would say that what happened was dilution. It got diluted, and that dilution led to compromise, right? It's
100%.
it's the only way
100%.
that you can compromise the power of acid is to dilute it.
Yeah. Well, it looked like acceptance, but it wasn't really acceptance of the fullness of the gospel.
Right.
It was almost like an acknowledgement of like, well, we can't resist this. So let's just accept it. Let's bring it in. And so then, like you
Ah,
said, then all of a sudden it started getting diluted and lost its power, lost its efficacy, like all that kind of stuff changed when
it's a
people
good
started bringing
point,
it in.
bro.
But like as you're saying, like they weren't fully committed to it. They weren't fully sold out to the original message.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, Constantine, I don't think Constantine, there's a lot of debate of whether or not Constantine was was purely a Christian, or if he was just acting in, in a way that was, um, I don't know.
Politically expedient,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, expedient. I get, yeah, right. And a way for national expediency because it wasn't going away. There was a lot of angst and animosity. I mean, culturally, that angst and animosity was both sociocultural, but it was also, I mean, Nero and the the Caesars, the persecution, which is interesting because it created this dilution that created this compromise. It compromised with pagan culture
Sure.
because here's why, and I think this goes back to exactly what we're talking about, because you will compromise to maintain most favored status.
100%.
And so what happens is that,
Absolutely.
you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
so so what are the, like, kind of like the long-term consequences? Well, they when all of a sudden you have most favored status, you lose this martyr ethos,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Persecution in the early church forged communities marked with Christ-like sacrifice. In other words, they connected themselves to Jesus Christ by saying, Jesus gave himself and we're giving ourselves both in life and in death. That became the sort of the battle cry of Christianity. And so
Yeah.
now when persecution ceased, martyrdom then was not just eliminated because we're like, well, that sounds like that's probably a good thing. And I agree. So there's a difference between persecution and the compromise that comes from trying to maintain most favored status. And part of the issue was that the state maintained like clerical privilege and property. Why? Because the state said, we're going to create a cleric class that is equivalent to the sort of surrogate power structure for the Roman government.
Yeah.
So the clerical status, privilege, and property rights. I mean, they got exemptions. The state gave them property. Rome helped them build their basilicas. I mean, all of this stuff, and so it all gets tangled up and produce this state church alliance. And I think it's interesting that that Constantinian shift
Yeah.
formalized this church state relationship that on the surface somebody might look at it and say, yeah, but half of Rome became Christian. Sort of, but
Sort of.
not in its pure form, like the biblical Jesus model, the kingdom model, the first century model, the first believers. And this gets back to now, does that demonstrate what the church has looked like in the United States? Similarly, having shared most favored status like that third century or fourth century church and the 20th century church predominantly in North America.
Man, I think this is such a great point because it seemed like acceptance. It seemed like that was what was happening. But what you read in Acts 28, that was the reality. It was still being spoken against. So it may look like you talk about Rome built, giving a special status and building basilicas and doing all those kinds of things. Well, guess what that produces? If that's your meal ticket, if that is what's providing you upward mobility in the class
Mm,
system, are
mhm.
you are you going to stand up and preach certain things about
Bro,
morality? Are you
bro.
going to stand up and challenge, people when they misuse and abuse their authority because they're the ones that are in control of, those things that you think are necessary and needed. So
Mm,
the reality is here's the reality. It may look like most favored status, but the reality is there's still that underlying animosity. There's still that underlying antagonistic view and approach. As long as you just blend in, as long as you don't contradict what we want to do, as long as you don't do all that kind of stuff, then we're cool and we're fine. But the moment that you start coming against that, what really is underneath the surface, which is that animosity of, we don't want to live the way you want to tell us to live. We don't challenge us, don't confront us. I guarantee you, Ken, if you put a John the Baptist in Rome,
mhm.
he would have that thing would have burnt to the ground because he would have
Yes.
been preaching righteousness in the streets. I mean, they'd have had his head chopped off in no time flat, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because that animosity was still there, even if the martyrdom wasn't there, even if there
Yes.
wasn't the deaths of Christians, the animosity and the angst was still there, which I think is a great reflection of the world and the culture that we live in. It looks
Right.
like there's acceptance. It looks like all this kind of stuff. But the moment you start introducing certain, you know, pieces of whether it's like our moral responsibility or kingdom values and that kind of stuff, now all of a sudden you see kind of what's really there. So then the question becomes, okay, as a church, how do we function, how do we operate, especially in a church culture that's built itself almost exclusively on attractional things? How do we not offend? How do we not
Wow.
make people feel like sinners? How do we not make people feel like that they're being
Mhm.
judged or anything of that kind of stuff? Like,
Yes.
how many times a week do you hear somebody saying, well, the Bible says, we're supposed to love, not judge, right?
Wow.
It feels like there's agreement. It feels like everything is fine, but there's something underlying, and we've got as modern Christians in this era figure out how to navigate that to reclaim and redeem the power of the gospel in our hour.
Man, that's a great, bro. What a great, I mean, spot on, man. Spot on. I think it's interesting. Like, let me give you, for example, exactly what you're talking about, where you're talking about delusion and compromise, and you become subject to the state um, in that Roman era. Um, it was it was the it was the I think it was a professor, research scientist Christian Anderson,
Hmm.
spelled with a K, that early in the COVID pandemic, early in the COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
sent a private email to Anthony Fauci and said um, that that it's almost impossible to conclude anything but that this was a lab leaked gain of function. The spike proteins are not, they look more like HIV than like it's like, and he says making it a natural occurring deal is, I think his words were, freaking unlikely.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden they have this big meeting. And in the this is I don't I guess I don't know if this is theoretic or conspiracy or whatever, but they had this big meeting, and we know this, and they had this big meeting, and there's this Slack record, and they're in this meeting, and all of a sudden there's this somehow Fauci starts saying, hey, we can't, we better, we better not run with this, we better run away with it, and they said something about this big ask. All of a sudden, Christian Anderson goes from being like he in fact in the Slack account they said he was arguing with this other researcher saying it's an impossibility that this is just a natural occurring deal. Like they're going at it, right? They're
Right.
thinking like they're talking in this, we're trying to figure out what happened here. And then all of a sudden there was this 180, and Christian Anderson is leading a group for Fauci for writing a paper saying why it's probably likely that it just occurred out of this market, right? And the only thing that makes sense about the 180 was that he was in line for a multi-million dollar grant.
Yeah.
And so here's the deal. I mean, okay, you could say this is, oh, that's just conspiracy and that's just, whatever. And who really knows? That's my point. Who really knows what all happened with that? We do know early on he was dude, this was manufactured in a facility. There is no doubt. To
Right.
writing a paper that says, well, it can't really be proven conclusively, so whatever.
Something shifted.
Something shifted. And here's the deal: the power of the purse strings. The
That sounds
power,
like a good sermon title.
right? The power of controlling things by I'll just remove I'll just remove your most favored status. I'll
Yeah.
just pull back. I don't have to tell. I don't even have to tell you. I'll just insinuate. Hey, don't you have a grant coming up?
Yeah.
And and so what's the point? The point is what will people do? I got my dog in the back.
That's so awesome. I love it. I love it.
This is the thing. I said that's the
A
painter.
lot.
I know, hilarious. There we go. And so we I think this points to the fact though that what we're talking about in that if there's this intermingling, if there's this compromise, and Rome says, yeah, you're not going that way, or you're not preaching that anymore, or you're not emphasizing that. And I guess my point ultimately is to say, I've been in places where, I think there's nothing wrong with, and I'm not indicting anybody, but I've been in places where, a pastor's like, hey, I'll call the judge. I know so and so, and I'm, whatever. And that's, you spend time in a community and you get relationships. And so it's not to say that they're compromised. Okay. And
Sure.
we're not, we're
Sure.
not saying if you know somebody and you're connected and you know some politicians and whatever that you're compromised.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that when things reach most favored status, we think differently about how to maintain that, particularly if our missional model, here's the segue,
Yeah.
particularly if our missional model is make our church as attractive as possible, and that's our growth mechanism.
Man, it's so true. And I think so, what we're not saying is that we need to swing on the pendulum and do the opposite. Like, the
Right.
the goal is not to be
Yeah.
to make your
Inflammatory.
own, yeah, to be inflammatory. That's not what we're saying, but what we are saying is it's fool's gold. That's the bottom line, bro. It's absolutely fool's gold if we think, and we see it again. I'm thankful for moments and opportunities that God opens doors and whatever. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, there our responsibility is to do the mission, to uh communicate and articulate the value system of the kingdom, regardless of who that's going to affect, how that's going to affect anybody. Somebody used to tell me, like, before I'd go up and preach, they'd always say, go up and preach without fear or favor. And never really thought about that, but there is some element of that in the body of Christ. If our whole model of success, again, I don't want to beat the dead horse, we've talked about this a lot, but if the whole model of success is, like you're talking about, like the acceptance or getting into certain circles, or even crowd size and all that kind of stuff, it can make you feel like, man, there's this massive acceptance. But what is the real, I think here's the question for you, Ken. Okay, what is the real evidence of kingdom impact? I
Hmm.
think that's the question we need to start asking ourselves, is what should be the markers for us as we start looking at it and saying, okay, is the church really producing kingdom impact in our world? Just people attending a church service and whatever, certainly that can't be the marker. So what should we be looking for? How can we define that? How can we look at it and say, again, this is not saying crowd size is neutral,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
This is not, a promotion of house church and smaller
No.
numbers and all that kind of stuff. That's not what we're saying. But the question is, like, what are you doing to get there? That's
Yeah.
that's the question drives it. And then so what are the markers of kingdom missional success? And then maybe talk to us about, what does this mean for us to live individually?
Well, yeah. I mean, wow, that's some great questions there. I think I think you've rightly pinpointed, saying that it doesn't automatically, I know I've heard sermons that have suggested that if we had more persecution, that we would grow, that the
Hmm.
greater numbers of churches worldwide that are experiencing growth today is the persecuted church. We've heard the stories. I mean, I love the story of Bishop Ellis, Joe Ellis, who was preaching in an access challenged nation,
Yeah,
and to underground pastors, he was saying that they were, that he was praying. Actually, he wasn't saying to them, he was praying, and praying that God would give them favor and that God would, work to remove the persecution and to give them favor and so on and so forth. And they stopped him and said,
yeah,
no, 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 no. We don't want to become like the American church. And it was interesting because they said it is that very thing that gives us the edge. It is that very thing that causes us to have this awareness of deep devotion. People aren't just church attenders. People don't just show up on Sunday. It's not just simply I go to that church. You can't wear an "I love my church" T-shirt. In an access
yeah.
challenge nation. It's not about you'd love my church. You ought to come to my church. You'd love my church. I think you've pinpointed, you've hit sort of the center of the bullseye in this
Mm.
idea that says it doesn't necessarily mean that if we're persecuted or if we don't have most favored status, that all of a sudden it creates integrity and authenticity.
Sure.
I think that it's demonstrating that it's not necessarily that. It's not proving that will automatically happen. I think what we see is we know what happens when the church moves from um, the missional power of 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 being persecuted and having being the church in a skeptical culture versus being a church in a time and an era when the idea is, man, if you want to succeed in this town, if you want to be somebody here, if you need to find the church that everybody goes to and be a part of that. And so
Yeah.
what is the missional magnet? I think that's a big deal. I think number one. I think number two is, like you said, what does it look like? Give us the identifying characteristics. And I think what we have to do is we have to redefine fruitfulness beyond cultural influence. In other words, like, what does resilience look like? When
Mm.
you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Like, what does resilience look like? you know, it would be hard for somebody to switch churches because they like the music that church over there plays better than the music they play here. Dude, you talk about, they talk about uh, um, first world problems.
Yeah.
Isn't that the
Yeah.
term?
Yeah. First world
Right?
problems.
First world
Like
problems.
you had to wait in line at Chick-fil-A for 7 minutes for your order.
Yeah. I was at Chick-fil-A and I was late for a meeting because it took them 7 minutes to, and so, yeah. And I think, first world problems. I went to Starbucks the other day and
They
Wi-Fi
didn't have
wasn't working.
Oh
I
man, that's
couldn't get my
awesome.
paper done because Wi-Fi wasn't working at Starbucks. That first world problems. I went over to that church because I like the music that they're doing better than the church over here, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
bro, most favored status church problems.
Right?
Because nobody in first century Christianity decided to go to a different church because that different church was more like the church that they liked. It was like there was so I think the characteristics of the mindset and the people and the mentality in that environment, like what is it then? What are you going to use for a drawing card, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is going to be your drawing card? Well, it's certainly not going to be you love our music. We've got we have a fresh whatever, all of those things. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, and we're not saying, well, if we go back to brush arbors, we'd have revival. If we went back to just hard wooden pews, we'd have revival. That's dumb. That's not
That's
what we're saying is, what is the mindset and mentality that creates consumer Christianity, that creates people having sort of an easy believism mindset, that creates attractional model churches, which creates a church that says we're going to grow because we're going to make this the coolest and best experience that people could ever have. And nobody ever really comes into contact with the real gospel and the challenge that, like Paul said, to live is Christ and to die is gain. We are not our own. We're bought with a price. You do realize that by becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ and experiencing new birth, you are giving up the title deed to your life to Jesus. You do realize that. Well, no, I'm not doing that. I'm just coming here because I got cool coffee and music.
bro, when you said that, something hit me. How often do we ascribe the reason why we experience certain things, whether it was an outpouring of the Spirit, maybe a revival that everybody remembers or whatever. And so, like you said, like we need to go back to brush arbors because back we had brush arbors, man, we had powerful moves of God, and what you've done is you've misappropriated where the power and the source is from, right? It wasn't the
Right.
brush arbor. It might have been the fact, it most likely was the fact that you had a group of people that were considered outcasts. They were the wrong side of the tracks people. That generation of pioneers were the people that had tomatoes being thrown at them, people that were telling them to, getting run out of town, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't the brush arbor that brought it. It was the commitment. It was the
Mm,
dedication. It was the transformation. It was the commitment to prayer, the understanding without the
that's
Spirit
it.
of God, we can't do this by ourselves.
Yes.
And yet so much of
Wow.
our world attempts on both sides of the spectrum. Well, we need to go back to songbooks, or we need to go back to brush arbors, or we need to go back to Sunday night services, or we need what you're identifying like a moment, a place, a time, something that was there when you were experiencing what you thought was the greatest moment of revival, but that wasn't the source. Or you could go
Right.
on the other side and say, man, we need this and we need that, and we got to have all this kind of stuff. All of those things are neutral.
Right.
None of that stuff. We're not saying they're good or bad. They're all neutral, but none of those things can produce the kind of revival that will turn the world upside down. It demands and it requires people that are committed, they're consecrated, they're willing to sacrifice, they're willing to do the things that are necessary. They're not focused on like what you talked about, first world problems, going to the church across town because I like the music or because they have other programs that our church doesn't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
when you
Bigger youth
when you
group
have
or. Yeah.
When you have committed people that are willing to stick it out through thick or thin, they're locked in, they're focused, they're committed, and they're experiencing transformation. It's going to produce that. And I think we drive ourselves nuts trying to figure out, like we do all the studies. What's this church doing to grow? What's this church doing to grow? The elements, the concepts, the principles are all the same going back to the very beginning. So my question is,
Yeah.
I can't change, it's kind of like we've talked about the individualistic culture versus the
Collectivist.
uh collectivist cultures and whatever, right? And I've thought a lot about that. We can't change the culture at large out here. This is the culture that God has plopped us in. He's
You're
dropped
talking
us
about
in this
beyond the
culture
walls
for
of the
this moment,
church?
beyond the walls of the church. I'm talking about the
Yeah.
world that we live in,
Yeah.
right?
Gotcha. Hmm.
American culture is primarily individualistic. I can't change that to make it collectivist. Okay. Similarly, we live in a culture where there is a mirage, in my opinion, a mirage of feeling like that um, that Christianity's the most favored status, right? There's
Hmm.
a mirage of that. I can't change that, which then kind of produces this real easy, kind of passive approach to faith and Christianity. I can't change that. So how in the world do we go about trying to cultivate, not necessarily produce, but we can't produce them. How can we cultivate the things that you're talking about that that produce that real deep level of commitment and consecration?
Hmm. Well, I think, yeah, I think that there is a shift going on. I think that shift, Chris, is beyond. Now, obviously, you've moved from that wide scope. Like we can't change the world around us. We could change us, and I think
Yeah,
that's the important thing that you're talking about there. And I think as you spoke about that, what really dawned on me was the fact that there is kind of a move toward that. First, in broader Christianity, there's a lot of talk these days about, um, you know, these very things, like out in what we'll call general Christendom, and or general. I don't want to say Christendom, but general Christianity in North America right now. There are a lot
yeah.
of conversations that are going on about whether or not we're living in an age or an era where Christianity reflects the authentic biblical pattern. And
And I
I'm
think
not
there's a
talking about
growing
apostolic
frustration.
churches.
Right. There's a growing frustration, clearly a growing frustration among I think all denominations and pastors. There is a growing frustration of it's this is not producing what Christianity is supposed to be producing.
Well, and it's like that. It's like the thing that we talk about a lot when we say, you know, to pastors, hey, pastors, how many of you are tired of being a plate spinning pastor?
Right.
How many of you are tired of being a plate spinner, of being a corporate manager of the church when you thought you were getting involved in changing lives and being a part of true deep transformation, and now you find yourself basically being an administrator
Yeah.
of a corporation? How many
Yeah.
of you how many of you feel frustrated with this idea of being a plate spinner, of keeping people happy so that you can maintain your attendance, so that you can maintain your membership rolls, so that you can maintain your budget, so that you can maintain your all the things?
Yeah.
And pastors, in 100% of the cases, raise their hand.
Hmm. Right.
A hundred
Right.
percent of the time, they raise
100%.
their hand saying, "That's not what I signed on for." It is frustrating, which is why that of all of the what have traditionally been considered top 10 professions in America, there's
Yeah.
no higher dropout rate than the dropout rate of pastors in the ministry, from the ministry.
So true, bro.
And And I think that's the thing that when you begin to look at it, you're like, that's a demonstration of a systemic problem. Particularly when people say, this isn't what I signed up for. I felt a
Yeah.
call of God to make a difference in, so I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be, and there is increasingly an emphasis on this idea that first and foremost, we're called to be disciples. First
Yeah.
and foremost, we're called to consistently find ourselves in tension between the Jesus way and our way.
Yeah.
Paul said, I travail again until Christ be formed in you. Paul's travailing. He said, besides the thing that comes from without, the persecution, the beatings, being let down over the wall of a city in a basket, all of those kinds of things, which are pressures. He says the pressures that come from within, the care of the church, this idea that says
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of pressure God gives you grace for. And I think that's the thing. If we could return to this place where rather than trying to figure out how I can keep somebody here, I want to figure out how I can challenge somebody to be like Jesus. I don't want to figure out how I can make somebody comfortable and happy and make sure that they keep coming to my church. I want to figure out, how do I put them in tension against the Jesus model until that tension is only faithfully resolved in an authentic decision to move towards the Jesus model, to put my way down, pick up the Jesus way and become like him. That is biblical, authentic Christianity. If that's not going on in a regular basis, then we have a reduced version of it.
And it'll produce what it's producing. People that are looking for all the things that make them more comfortable, make them feel better, demand less of them. Just, I'll just show up, and if I don't show up, it's fine. And I've got, it's not the priority. It's just one thing on a long list of things. And Christianity was never meant to be lived that way. There's no way that you can truly live that out. And I told somebody the other day, I had a conversation with them, and I said, you can believe in Jesus and not
Mm-hmm.
be a disciple.
Boy, that's so true.
And like you can have the belief, man, I believe that, the Jesus way is the way. I believe all that. But a disciple is the person that's willing to say, I'm going to lay everything down. As a matter of fact, it's the only way. Jesus said, you can't follow me unless you deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. You can believe, and I think that's really where we're at. There's a difference between believing, and this is why I think language is so critical and so important, because words matter. And the word discipleship needs to matter. It needs to be more than the label of Christian, is more identifying with, I believe Jesus. I believe in Jesus. I believe that he is God. I could even believe that. But I haven't surrendered my life. I haven't laid my life down completely,
Shoo.
which has
Bro.
produced the culture and the world that we live in, which is, again, is frustrating. It's frustrating for pastors. And here's the deal: we can't blame people, because I say we've created the culture. I'm saying, like, the Christian culture at large has produced that.
Yes.
That's what we've demanded of
Mm-hmm.
people, and we're afraid. Going back to the purse strings, we're afraid to demand higher consecration and higher commitment and we're afraid sometimes to challenge people in those areas, because we know that if we push too hard, then people are going to leave, and they're going to go find someplace else where they don't have to live these things, and they don't have to be challenged. And, like,
And there will
man,
always
it's
be a church there, and there will always be a church out there that offers them, a 6-month discount on tithes and you don't have to do all that here. And, you know,
100%, 100%.
Yeah, I
And it
like what
becomes a
Tracy Russell
self-perpetuating
said.
cycle.
I like what Tracy Russell said: real faith, real love, real power. Be the church the world is missing. The world is full of the fake church. We need to be fierce, authentic, and anointed. Amen. You know what, Chris? Here's the thing. When we start talking about authenticity, only Jesus can validate the authenticity of the church. We
Sure.
find that we find that in the first couple of books of Revelation. Jesus speaking to the seven churches of Asia. And the Bible says that Jesus spoke to the churches, and what was he doing? Jesus was basically giving them an audit. Jesus was auditing the church. Jesus's audit was an audit of authenticity. Only Jesus can validate our authenticity. If our church is validated by having widespread acceptance, if our church is validated by social acceptance, if our church is validated because the governor came, if our church is validated because we have a president that speaks in tongues, if our church is validated, right? It's like, oh, this is a validate, man, look at this is a vindication of Pentecostalism. We have a president that speaks in tongues. What? I mean, that's
It
maybe
doesn't
amazing.
validate.
This doesn't validate anything. We're not validated by anything but Jesus Christ. We're not validated. We're not validated by church growth.
Yeah.
I mean,
100%.
but what happens is unfortunately in some ways we have created a scorecard where to some degree we are validated in the eyes of each other through church
Mm-hmm.
growth.
Bro.
A church is
So true.
automatic. A church is automatically validated if it doubles in a year, and but the question is, okay, cool. I mean, but I mean, I'm waiting for the Jesus audit on that.
The Jesus audit. I love it. I love it. I know we're up against the clock, but you got me thinking. I golfed with a young man in his early 20s on Friday. His name is Parker. Had just met him, and so he and his dad were our golf partners. And they said, hey, we heard your pastor at church, whatever. And so I said, yeah. They asked me the name of the church. I told them, and they said, what's kind of the flavor of the church? And I said, oh, we're apostolic Pentecostal. And he said, what the dad was like, yeah, I was raised Catholic, but Southern Baptist, so we know about those Pentecostal things, whatever. And so he said, Parker here, okay, so young guy in his early 20s, right? He said, Parker here has been on a journey. I said, really? He said, yeah, man, he's really been searching and thinks he may have found a church and whatever. And I said, well, tell me about that, Parker. Tell me about the journey. And he said, he said, I'm going to a Presbyterian church. And he must have seen the look on my face. And I was like,
I did the same.
I kind of turned my head. I was like, man, I was not expecting that. And he said, he kind of started chuckling, started laughing. I said, bro, I said, no offense. There's no offense to any Presbyterians out there. But I'm like, dude, you have to be the youngest guy in that church by like 40 years. And he started laughing. I said, tell me how
How'd you
did
end
you
up
end up
there?
there? Like, what in the world? And here's what he said. He said, honestly, I got so turned off by the performance. He said, every place that I went, the performance was great. He said, I just didn't, there just was nothing there. There was nothing to it. And he said, I started going to this church, and he said, there's community. And what I'm really looking, here was his exact words, bro. He said, what I'm really looking for is I want to get back like to the original roots of it all.
Jesus,
Like,
Jesus.
I believe that in our
Well,
hour, there is an awakening that's
Presbyterian
happening.
Presbyterianism is a faster track to the original than non-denominationalism.
Right. But right. And he was searching, it's that my thing was like, the dude is searching for something, and he's saying all of the stuff and whatever it's not appealing to my soul. It's not
Wow,
appealing to my spirit. It may appeal
wow.
to my flesh a little bit, and it may be something that draws people in, but he's like, man, there's something that I'm really looking for. So we had a really good, just,
It's amazing.
introductory conversation. But I think that kind of shows there is an element out there of people that are like, and again, it's not about the things. We both have cameras and lights and all that kind of stuff and whatever. So
Sure.
it's that those things are neutral. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about that. But what we're
Right.
saying is
Yeah. We're not
those
automatically
things.
saying if you've got a digital screen and
Not
a
saying
whatever,
that.
you're automatically not authentic. That's not even remotely what we're saying.
But what we're saying is he's only looked at attractional church models. that those are the things that are going to draw you in. And
Yes.
he's like, that stuff doesn't do it for me. I'm looking for something deeper. And I believe we have the opportunity as the apostolic church to come in and demand high levels of consecration, not from a heavy-handed approach, not from dictatorial, but just say, Jesus wants to take you places. He wants you to experience things. But if you're gonna do that, you have to leave your nets behind.
Mm,
You've got to be all in, full abandonment into Jesus. That, I think, Ken, is the major
mm,
issue that we face in American Christianity is we've not
mm.
demanded full abandonment of
Allegiance.
ourselves into
Yeah.
Jesus. 100%.
Complete allegiance. So good. What's Lord? That's the question. The New Testament church, the first century church, their phrase was Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
That's it. There is no other Lord. Jesus is Lord, and He's Lord over the world. He's Lord over all things, but most importantly, He's Lord over me. So that's so good. And Chris, I think that's a great way to finish today. I think that's so powerful. You know, you could have go ahead and have great music. I mean, go ahead and have we're down with that. Like that's cool. Go ahead and do. But the thing about it is that it's like a chef that makes a meal, or somebody like a friend that makes a meal, and they get done and they go, man, you're gonna have to share the recipe with me, because they want to know,
Yeah.
how do I make this? How did you
Yeah.
make this? What was it? I've done, man, oh, I've done this dish, but it didn't taste like this. And so what happens is that when a person comes and they experience the presence and power of God, whether it's and it could be amazing music and you can have the big screens and everything and do all the stuff, but when they go, something was different here, right? I've made this
Yeah.
before. I made fried chicken before, but it didn't taste like this. Or I've made lasagna
Yeah.
before, but it didn't taste like this. And the question is, I got to have the recipe. If there's something in it that people go, "Man, I've been to churches that have sung these songs. I've been to, right? If
Yeah.
there's something that says, well, I'll tell you what it is. We're sold out people. That we're sold out people that authentically live out as disciples the Lordship of Jesus Christ in our life. He is open to change us in any way He sees fit. And this is His favor on us. And this is the blessing of the anointing. And this is and they're like, okay, you're going to have to give me the recipe because I want this for me.
Yeah.
I want to
So
be able to
good.
make this at home.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, I think we didn't even scratch the surface on this topic. Like I was looking at some of the notes. We didn't even cover hardly any of it today. Just kind of just real high level view of it. But hopefully this kind of starts some thinking and starts a process. Maybe we'll circle back at some point and have a conversation on some of the other points about how do we navigate the mission in a world that views Christianity that way, and how do we effectively challenge people to do that, to make Jesus
Yep.
Lord, not just
Amen.
Savior, but make Him Lord. So appreciate everybody jumping on. Hey, listen, mark your calendars. Next Tuesday, July 29th, is going to be the 5-year anniversary on the day, 5-year anniversary of the launch of the Mobilized Church podcast. Spread the word, get the word out. Hopefully you can join us and be a part of that. Appreciate everybody being on today. And check us out, thedillinghamgroup.org. All kinds of great information for you there. So come back next Tuesday, Ken, for the 5-year anniversary. Look forward
Let's
to seeing
go.
everybody there. Until then, go live mobilized.